Let's talk about reading and the active reading that we will define as annotation. There's two kinds of reading, so I think it's important that we say this out loud. I mean, there's what we call social reading or survival reading. That's the kind of reading that you do, for example, when you're reading on the net, or you're reading and you're game playing, or you're reading when you're driving in downtown or whatever, going to the grocery store. That's all social kinds of reading. The second kind of reading is what we will call academic reading or annotation reading. Now, this kind of reading is really much different. Let's face it, when you sit down to, for example, read a novel just for fun, you don't have to worry about some teacher giving you a multiple choice exam about the reading. However, when you read actively, when you annotate, the understanding is that there will be a response at some point, and so you're trying to prepare in some way for that. So this academic reading requires of you then that you do some things before you come to class, some things during class, and some things after class. I mean, all of us, I think, have probably sat in a classroom, for example, a math classroom, where the instructor just starts explaining material at lightning speed across the whiteboard, turns around and asks if there's any questions. Of course, nobody has any idea what she's even talking about. And then finally some brave soul says, can you show that one more time to us? And of course the teacher says, okay, watch closely. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Any questions? Okay, well, since there's no questions, then the problem set assigned is blah, 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 go to work. And of course the students, if you've noticed, will usually try to navigate towards one of the students in the room that maybe has half a clue of what's going on. Can I suggest that this is maybe not the best way to try to go about taking notes in class? So I'm going to make a suggestion to you, as I made a suggestion to many students over the years, and this, by the way, is an approach that I did not invent. It's been, over the years, it's been constructed and adapted in many ways, and I'm going to suggest that you actually learn and then try to adapt it for yourself. The question for us is, what is annotation and how can I use it to improve my learning? Let's go to the whiteboard and take a look at the fundamentals of it. Later in the organizational section, I'm going to suggest that you employ some kind of a 3-ring notebook system. It's the easiest way to organize. You're going to take a 3-ring piece of notebook paper. You're going to draw a line down the center of that, or you can fold your paper in half. On the left-hand side of the page, we're going to do what we call pre-class annotations. That is to say, things are going to be done before we come to class, and the instructor is going to talk about that material. We're going to do that work in red ink on the left-hand side of the line, for reasons that we'll make clear here in a moment. Then in class, we will engage in our in-class notes, okay? And we're going to do that in blue or black ink, all right? And the idea here is that what we want to try to accomplish in the end is some kind of learning, so that we can perform well on the post-class preparations, which obviously is what we would call exam prep of some kind or another, as outlined, of course, in the book itself. Let's talk real quickly about how each of these will look. First of all, we're going to do pre-class notes on the left-hand side of the page. Now, the reason why I recommend to you that you work with red ink is because as you prepare to go on to university, you will be buying your books. At the high school level, you normally cannot mark in your books, but as you move on to the next level, you'll be expected to buy your books, and you will do what we call internal annotations. That is to say, annotations that are done inside of the volume itself. Let me give you an example here. A student of mine studying Macbeth, you can kind of see this is the volume, and then in the volume itself, you will notice there's red marks that are made with kinds of notations in the margin. This is what we call internal annotation, okay? Now, the project here on the whiteboard, as I'm describing it, is what we call external annotation. That is to say, annotation that's done in the notebook paper itself. And because you're working with red ink already in the internal annotations, it probably makes sense to go ahead and do that work right here on the left-hand side of the page with red ink. Always begin by logging in. That is to say, have some kind of organizational system. The date that the information is going to be presented in class, not the date that you're doing it, but the date it's to be presented in class, the page number that it comes from, etc., etc. Then you're going to begin. depending upon what it is that you're studying. For example, if you're studying mathematics, you're probably going to work the sample problem in the left-hand side here the night before. Now, when you're working mathematics, you can obviously go away from the use of ink to pencil. That makes sense. If you're working with history, for example, and you know that the next day, or a couple of days in advance, the instructor is going to talk about chapter 7 from the history book, The Three Causes of the American Civil War, then you're going to go ahead and do that reading before you come to class, before the instructor talks about the material, and you're going to take notes. For example, anything that's highlighted or bullet pointed, you're going to write that information down. In other words, you're going to try to teach yourself the information as best you can using the textbook, and you're going to do all of that work on the left-hand side of the page in red ink. Then you'll come to class. Coming to class for you then will be an exercise in trying to find two pieces of information while the instructor is talking. At the college level, this is one of the challenges, is often instructors will speak so fast that there isn't any way you can write down all of the information. What to do? Well, you're going to first of all be looking for what we call match information. Match information is anything the instructor says that you already have written out of the hymnal, out of the book, out of the text, okay? And so you're going to make that mark. You can circle it, you can star it, however. You're going to invent a system that works well for you. So match information, anything the instructor says that is also on the left-hand side of the line for you. The only other materials left then is what we will call new information, and that's what this right-hand side of the page is for. New information, quite simply, anything the instructor says that is not in the textbook. Okay? Let me give you an example here from a student of mine. This is just pulled right out of his notebook. Notice here, red ink on the left-hand side. Notice here, right-hand side. You can just glance at this and notice that the majority of the information that was presented for this lecture was actually new information. What does that mean? That means that the stuff was already in the textbook. The instructor didn't really even cover that much. And yet, chances are, guess what? It's going to end up on the exam. Which really kind of leads to one final question about post-class annotations, preparing for the examination. If you know everything that's match information, in other words, that's material that you already had listed on the left-hand side of the line, and the instructor said it, and you're aware of the new information, that's stuff that's not in the book, or the textbook, or the anthology, but the instructor has talked about it. If you know those two pieces of information, then ask the simple question, what can the instructor ask on the exam that you don't already know? That is to say, why would there be such heavy amounts of stress for the exam? What I want you to think about is, you can try this approach and begin to think about testing environments as almost like a game that you play, where you do a preparation for the exam, and then as you come into the exam, you actually are almost trying to discover if there's anything you missed. Chances are great, most of the time, you're not going to have missed a lot, which means there's no reason to fear a testing environment, but rather actually to become excited about the possibility that you can do very well. I challenge you to try this annotative approach for at least 3 weeks in a single class and see if it improves your learning and your confidence as you are sitting in the class. Of course, it's also going to improve, hopefully, your grade.